timer is timing. All right, so we begin today with Vayikra chapter 6. That's Leviticus chapter 6 to the uninitiated. And we're going to cover ourselves, if you will. This is not a commandment of God, so if you have to worry about it, because some people do, I suppose. But we do this just as a sign of respect. It's in a tradition that I happen to like. So anyway, it says this. Vayedaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor. Heard that one before, haven't you? Zav et Aharon et banav lemor zot Torat ha'olav hiv ha'olah al mukdah al ha-mizbeach kol ha-laila ad ha-boker ve'esh ha-mizbeach tukad bo. Velavash ha-kohen mido vad u miknese vad yilbash al besaro veherim et hadeshen asher tochal ha'esh et ha'olah al ha-mizbeach vesamo et zel ha-mizbeach ufashat et begadav velavash begadav acherim vechotzi et hadeshen el michutz lamachane el makom tahor vehaesh el ha-mizbeach tukad bo loti cheba uve'er aleha ha-Kohen et zim baboker, it is in there twice, ve'arach aleha ha'olah ve'hiketir aleha chelvei ha-shelamim esh tamid tukad al ha-mizbeach lo ticheve vezot Torat ha-mincha ha-kerev ota b'nei Aharon lipnei Yahweh el pnei ha-mizbeach ve'herim memenu bekum mezo mizolet ha-mincha umishamna ve'et kol ha-levona asher al ha-mincha ve'hiketir ha-mizbeach reach nichoach az karata la-Yahweh. My throat is so dry I can barely do this. Ve'hano teret mimena yochlu Aharon uvanav mazot te'achel be'makom kadosh ba'chotzar ohel moed yochluha. Lo te'apeh chametz chelkam natati ota me'ishai kodesh karashim hiv ka chatat vecha asham kol zarcha b'vnei Aharon yocholena ha'olam ledorotehem me'ishei Yahweh kol asher yiga bahem yikdash vayedaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor ze karban Aharon uvanav asher yakerivu la Yahweh beyom himashach oto asirit ha'efa solet mincha tamid machozita baboker umachozita ba'arev al machovat bashemen te'aseh murebechet te'vi'ena tu fenei minchat pitim ta'keriv reach nichoach la Yahweh. והכהן המשיח, והכהן המשיח, תחתיו מבניו, יעשה אתה חק עולם ליהווה, כליל כתר, וכל מיכת כהן כליל תהיה לא תאכל, וידבר יהווה אל משה לאמור, דבר אל אהרון ואל בניו לאמור, זאת תורת החטאת במקום אשר תשחט העולה, תשחט החטאת לפני יהווה, קודש קדשים היב. הכהן המחטא אותה יאכלנה במקום קדוש, תאכל בחוזר אוהל מועד. Oh, I had some right here. Give me a second. This is really rough. Oh. Was it Moed, right? Yeah. Ko asher yigag bive sarah yikdash va'asher yize midama al habeged asher yize aleha techabes b'makom kadosh. Ucheli cheres asher tevushal bo yishaver, ואם בכלי נחושת בשלה ומורח ושותף בימין. כל זכר בכהנים יאכל אותה קודש קדשים היב, וכל חטאת אשר יובא מדמה אל אוהל מועד לכפר בקודש, לא תאכל באש תשרף. Woo! You may be seated if you were standing. Oh, boy, of late, my mouth just dries out like nobody's business. Oh, that's probably a good idea. And trying to read this so you guys can hear every syllable. That just drags it out, I guess, makes it harder to do. All right, I do apologize for that, but let's get started. There are 5 sacrifices which are covered in chapters 6 and 7. We're beginning 6 today. 6 and 7 go hand in hand. They could have been the same chapter. One just kind of flows into the other. But we're going to talk about the 5 sacrifices in these 2 chapters. There are the same 5 types of sacrifice already covered in chapters 1 through 5. Each sacrifice begins with the phrase, "These are the instructions," because it's using the word Torat. Did you hear I was not saying Torah, I was saying Torat, because it's in plural. These are the instructions of ... whatever they happen to be. It's something I used to do when I was traveling around the East Coast teaching. I would say, who wants to answer this trick question? I mean, all I can say is I gave them fair warning. And, of course, every hand in the room, me, It's like, okay, what's the Hebrew word for law? And I mean, every hand in the room. So you pick somebody and they say, Torah. No, that was a trick question. Torah is not the word for law. It is the word for instruction. The word for law is mitzvah. I mean, Mitzvot, different ways to say the same word. Those are the commandments. Those are the laws. The Torah are the instructions. We need to keep that in mind because instructions go to what? They go to the law. So if you have 10 instructions, what does that tell you? They have to connect to something. Anyway, chapters 1 through 5 lay out who offers what and tells them how, while chapters 6 and 7 specify how the sacrifice is to be portioned, and then how that which is left is to be disposed of. Got it? All right. So we start with, very literally in English, it would be, and he spoke Yahweh to Moshe to saying, right? We know what that is. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, right? So I don't really need to teach you anything there. But what do we know when this sentence appears in a chapter? It's a topic change. So this is the topic for verses 1 through 11. All right, so anyway, the translation, Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, of the... What?
Where you have English Bible, so they'll know where you are.
Oh, if you're using an English Bible, you should be in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 8, because the English Bible, English isn't even the right word because the Jewish Study Bible is in English.
King James.
If you're using, why did you say that? Now you made the word jump out of my head. A Christian Bible. If you're using a Christian Bible, the numbering is different because they split up a chapter in the wrong place. Is that a big deal? Is it big going to heaven or hell? No, it's not that. It's just they didn't have chapters and verse numbers when this stuff was written. This is something that came along just prior to the entering into the Dark Ages. I mean, it predates the Dark Ages, but not by much. So it was a monk that started all of that stuff, oddly enough, and the Jews wound up going in and doing it. But of course, they broke it up properly because they spoke Hebrew, and the Christians did not. Let me tell you something about your Christian Bible. Tyndale is the only person who ever translated the actual Greek and Hebrew, and it's more likely that it was Latin and Hebrew. Some people will tell you that's not true, but you just go research this out a little bit. It's more likely that he translated the New Testament from the Latin text and in what they call the Old Testament from the Hebrew. That particular translation was finished. Whether he wrote the whole thing or not is questionable. He probably did not. For sure he had some help. It's probably had more help than we think. But it was a translation from a more original language, if you will. And then when the King James Bible and the Dewey Rhymes Bible and the Britches Bible, I'm trying to think of some earlier ones, though. The King's Bible and the Great Bible, which technically is the Queen's Bible. When those came out, they were just reworded translations of English. They took Tyndale's English work and reworded it. Why would they do that? Why wouldn't they just go to the original? Well, they trusted Tyndale for one thing. But the reason why they did it is because you could pick up a Tyndale right now. I happen to have one. Go over here to this other one and tell me if you can actually see any of the words.
Just the big letters. Oh, yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
That's what English looked like when this book was translated. And I can tell you right now that if you tried to pick it up and read it, it would be almost impossible. And it is, in fact, in English. You could, if you worked at it a little bit, you could, well, a lot, you could get it. I can read most of it now, but wow. So the reason why they translated, oh, dadgummit. Nobody got zapped off to Mars or anything, did they? Yeah, because that didn't work out real well. I dropped my mouse, sorry. So what I was trying to say is I don't remember. I hate it when that happens. So English had changed immensely between Tyndale and the Great Bible, and Tyndale and the Geneva Bible, which came after the Great Bible, and who was the other one? Anyway, English kept changing because they took basically three different English-esque languages and put them all together. So it just kept changing and changing and changing, and that was the need for these newer Bibles more than anything. Although when you get to the King James Bible, and by the way, I actually found an image of the original document, which is in fact in a library in London. It has been there almost since the moment it was written. And people thought it was lost. And you can even read some things on Google that say it's lost, but if you look hard enough, you'll find it. It's not lost. It's still there. The very document that the Puritans wrote to King James is still there, and you can read it because that English is more like our English, because that was in the 1600s, so very like 1604. It was very early. If it predates that, it's not by more than 10 years. I don't really remember for sure, but it's real early. It has to predate it because it's the reason why they had the big council in 1604. That's what caused it. So that letter said that they needed to change the Great Bible, which was a re-rendering of Tyndale's work. They wanted to change it to make it line up with the beliefs and customs of the Church of England. That's what they said. That was the reason for the King James Bible. It was not so that people could read it, know what the original text said. It was to make the text line up with what they did and they believed. And what they did and they believed most Christians would be horrified by that stuff today. Anyway. So these translations are not, even though they say it right in the book, if you get a King James Bible, it tells you that it was translated from the original text. No, it wasn't. No. They translated English into English over and over again. Even to this day, people are still putting that on their Bibles. You look at the one that any of these televangelists put out, it'll say translated from the... No, it's not. Those people don't know Greek and Hebrew and Latin and Aramaic. No, they don't. Let's move on. But we're still at the beginning we're still in verse 1, and there was something I wanted to tell you about. The word to, it says Yahweh spoke to Moshe, right? Of that word, Onkelos by Drauzine and Wagner says, and I quote, Onkelos and the other Targums replace scriptures to, the word to, T-O, which suggests a dictoral lecture or a one-sided discourse to the preparation, to the preposition with. So it said, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, and they changed it to Yahweh spoke with Moshe. In contrast, they went on, in contrast, implies a more respectful conversation. So they felt that God was very disrespectful, and they wanted to straighten out his mistake, apparently. I cannot understand anyone having a problem with God Almighty, the King and Sovereign Creator of all that is, commanding anyone to do anything. I can't wrap my head around that. If it was dictatorial and he was pointing his finger, so what? Who are you to say, well, God, you can't talk to me that way? Let's move on. If we were looking at verse 2 very literally in English, it says command, and then we'd have to draw an arrow pointing to the next word. Aharon, Aaron, and sons his, to say this instruction, the burnt offering, the burnt offering upon plate, upon the altar, all the night to the morning, and fire the altar kindled in it. I guarantee if you read that over and over again, it would make sense. As crazy as it sounds just reading it, if you read that over and over again, this thing would make sense. We start with the word zav. That's the word I was trying to think of a while ago. Generally, people will say command, but it's not really. It's to set up. It's to constitute, to appoint. It's a decree. You got to think more of, because I decree on this day you shall do that. You know what I'm saying? It's that word. It's not like here's law number 1, here's law number 2, here's law number 3. So it's kind of similar, because a decree is a law, but a decree is generally something that's either going to start on a certain day and go to perpetuity, or it's going to start on a certain day and end on a certain day, right? Anyway, so that's your word. This is et, which is the arrow that points to something. Aharon. That's the real name of the guy they call Aaron. So it's pointing to Aaron. This is ve'et, and so it's and, put another arrow, and point to what? Banav, his sons. Or in this case, sons his. Remember, Hebrew speaks the language properly, and Americans in English speak the word improperly. We say it wrong. We say, I am going to the store. All other languages and cultures say, to the store I am going, right? So, and that's, in my mind, proper. Because we're the only ones. Man, we're rebels with everything, right down to even our language, we're rebelling against everybody else. So anyway, so it's pointing to Aaron and his sons. And it says, lemor, so that's to say, the primary signification is to bear forth. It's to bring it to light. So you could say it's to shed light on the subject. So it's really more to clarify, the idea of clarifying something to make sure that somebody's understanding something. There's your idea. Then it says zot, which means this. And generally speaking, in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, I don't know a lot about modern Hebrew, but biblical Hebrew, you would normally say hazeh, or hazot in this case, because it's plural, or maybe that's just feminine. No, that would have to be, I don't know. It's plural and feminine. Let's just go with that. It's the word this, and the ha in front would make it the this. And most of the time they say hazeh. It's not necessary to put the direct article in front of it, but it's more common. Here they didn't do it. It's not a mistake. It's just not common. Now we move to the word Torat. And we have the word instruction, because it is instruction, but it's also doctrine. It's the doctrine of your parents, the instruction, the way they teach you to live your life, the things they teach you about life, teach you to be courteous, well, at least they used to. I'm not so sure anyone does that anymore, but anyway, let's move along. So it's instruction, like I was saying earlier. It is not the word for law. That's kind of an English translation thing. It is absolutely an English translation thing, but it's not really right. Then we have ha'olah, the burnt offering, that which is laid on an altar. This is the barbecue, the meat that you barbecue on the altar, right? Then it says heave, which literally means she, like she said this or she did that. But remember, in Hebrew, if you're going to use what we think of as the word it, you do that by saying the word for he or the word for she, because they are a gender-specific language. So this word can be used either way. It's either that it's a she or it's the feminine of the word it. Then our next word, ha'olah. Wow. So you have ha'olah, heave ha'olah. That's important. So it's the burnt offering again. Then this is all, which is upon. So obviously it's the burnt offering on mokdah. We have plate. Nobody's really sure. Some people would jump up and down and say, I know for sure that it's like a griddle. And I tend to think that's what it is. But the truth is we don't know. We really don't know. But it could be a griddle. It could be like your barbecue pit with the little lines on it and all that kind of stuff. Nobody really knows for sure, but we think it was just a flat plate like a griddle. So it's the meat that's on the griddle. Then it says all, which is the word on again, hamis ba'ak. So it's the meat that's on the plate that's on the altar. Then it says kol, which is the word for all. It's totality. All odd. The word odd. The Hebrew word odd. A-D in English. Odd. Did I miss a word? Oh, I did that last week, I think. Kol halayla. So all night long. All night long. Some of you will get it. And it says odd, which is until. So we've said you're going to leave this meat. You're going to, we're probably talking about fire, aren't we? Yeah, we are. You're going to make the fire that you cook the meat that's on the plate, that's on the altar. You're going to make that fire go all night long. And then it says, after this is odd, until haboker. So what's that mean? Until the morning. Then it says ve'esh. You hear the sound of fire. It's really more the sound of the oblation, the liquid offering hitting that plate, which is, I think, the main reason why most of us think it's a plate, because I guess it would still make that noise if you put it on the stripy things. I don't know if it would for sure. We should try that one of these days. But it would definitely do it on the plate. So anyway, it's the word for fire. This is hamis ba'ak, so the fire that is under the altar. Tukad says kindled bow, which this is a sound alike. It's not the word come. It's the word, it's two letters put together, and it's in it. In this case, it's the word he, the word for he. But we would say in it. All right, so our translation, and remember, you should be in chapter 6, verse 9 at this point. Command Aharon and his sons, saying, this is the instruction, and I put in little square brackets and squiggly letters, concerning, so that it's a little clearer that way, but it shows you that this word wasn't part of the actual sentence. We sometimes have to do that for it to make sense in English, but we don't want to add to or take away from the things that God said. So we do this so that you'll know, okay, that wasn't said, because it's not necessary in Hebrew. The sentence comes together differently and it's not necessary. In English, for you to understand it fully, we have to do this. So this is the instruction concerning the burnt offering. It is the burnt offering on the plate on the altar all night to the morning, and the fire on the altar is kindled in it. Still not really clear, is it? So it's just saying you got to keep the fire kindled all night long. You can't let that fire go out. So of the word command, the Sifra states that the reason why the text says command instead of speak is to show urgency. And that's right. That's exactly why you do that. And then of the word Aharon, Aharon and his sons, Nachmanides pointed out that this verse was specific to the Kohanim. So what does he mean by that? When it says Aharon and his sons. It's not Aharon and the 2 or 4 or 8 kids he may have had with his wife, right? No, that's not what it's talking about. The sons are the priests that follow him in ministry. Usually it's more about the Kohanim who will replace him. Like each high priest is for sure his son. But since those other regular priests are subject to the high priest, it generally, well, you can't get around the fact that it includes all of them as well. You can generally tell, you can exactly tell when they're being very specific about just the high priest, because they will use the word for high priest. Instead, they may say Aharon, Kohen HaGadol. It may say that to be that specific, but usually it's just going to say Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, and then Banav for his sons, right? I hope that made sense. I feel like I just messed that all up. Of the words, this is the instruction concerning the burnt offering. Rashbam pointed out that chapter 6 and 7 repeat the sacrifices from chapters 1 through 5, but with their details, which he is correct about. Also, based on chapter 7, verse 16, Rashbam wrote that these sacrifices had to be burned during the day because the text says in the day. He is wrong, because in the day is an idiom which connects the word day with a period of time. For example, the Bible talks about, it says literally, in the day when they were in the wilderness. Well, that day in the wilderness lasted 40 years. So Rashbam's wrong. He's taking everything very literal, which is what the sages did. Time and space from Israel does that. Of the words burnt offering, burnt offering / all night, Nachmanides wrote that if the fire went out, it was a sin against a negative commandment. This kind of teaching is why some people see God as a mean, petty, hateful God. These men wrote this way because they saw God this way. These are some of the guys that felt like God left the children of Israel at Mount Sinai and has just never come back. I mean, it's awful that they think that God is going to become angry and start throwing lightning bolts at people because the fire went out. No. You know what you do when the fire goes out? You put some new logs on and you start another fire. Anyway, that just bothers me. All right, so verse 3. We do have time. Literally, it would say, and clothe the priest, clothe he linen and underwear linen. He put on upon flesh he, and make rise the ashes that shall eat the fire, the burnt offering upon the altar, and place it near the altar. Again, this is one, if you read it a couple of times, it would actually make sense. It says, ve lavash, and clothe. This is of the idea of, running your arm through a sleeve and your leg through a pant leg. That's the image behind this, so it's to put on clothing, right? There's an interesting use of this that's more spiritual than literal. Job 29:14. Now, there's some idioms here, but here's what it says. I have put on righteousness. So what's the idiom? I have put on Torah observance. Then he goes on, and it has put me on. In other words, I am covered outside with Torah observance as a garment, and within it wholly fills me. Connected with this latter use of the expression by which the Torah, the Spirit of God, is said to put on anyone, in other words, to fill him, used in a negative, we don't need to know the negative. But basically, if you think about it, Job is saying, I put it on. I put my arm in that sleeve, and I put my leg through that pant leg. And then you got to think of it at the other way around, as if God has put you on. He's put his arm in your sleeve and his leg through your leg. So you've put on the law of God, the Torah observance, and God has fully filled that space. Let that one percolate for a while. That's awesome. All right, so the next one is HaKohen, the priest. And that's singular. That's not with an S at the end. The priest. Then it says, Mido, you will clothe him. This is a garment, so-called, from being spread out. It's kind of just another way to say the same thing. Our next word is vod. Oh, because they're saying you'll clothe him with vod, with linen. Like my shirt is linen, made of that material. So that's what they're saying. You'll clothe him with linen. Then it says, u michnaseh, and underwear. And some of the English one of the Bibles anyway, use the word breeches in place of this word for underwear. It is known as the Breeches Bible. You should Google that. It's kind of funny. But that's what they use. So and breeches, vod. So the undergarments need to be made out of, and this is very specific about underwear, okay? And it's saying that needs to be made out of linen as well. Then it says yilbash. He'll put it on. It's that same word. I'm slipping my arm into it, my pant leg, and my leg into the pant leg. You got to put it on. This is all, which is on besaro. So this is what you're putting on his body, on his flesh. Some people make some things out of that are not right. Don't take that stuff literal. Well, do put the clothes on. It should be at least that literal, okay? This is veharim, and make rise. This is pick it up, to lift it up, right? What are we making rise? Does it say? Oh, the ashes. I was like, what are you picking up? It says the word for pick up, and then it's et, which is the arrow. So what's it pointing to? Ha deshen, the ashes. So now you've got this clothing on, and now it's telling you pick up the ashes, asher tochal, that are eaten, ha'esh, by the fire. I never really thought of it that way, but isn't it the log that's eaten by the fire? The ashes are anyway. That's a little too literal, I suppose. And this is et ha'olah, the burnt offering. From the burnt offering, this is all hamisba'ak, that was on you put the burnt offering on here, then there are ashes that come from that. If you were burning everything all the way through, there would be ashes on that griddle, wouldn't there? I think this may be what we're talking about. Let's finish. Vesamo, and place it. So you picked up the ashes, and you're going to place it at zel, which means near. It's a sound-alike word. Sounds just like goat, doesn't it? Hamis ba'ak. So you place it near the altar. So what are we saying here? What's my translation? And clothe the Cohen in his linen cloth, and linen underwear he will put on his flesh, and take up the ashes which were consumed by the fire of the burnt offering on the altar, and place it beside the altar. So that's exactly what it's saying. You're taking the stuff that's on the altar, not the ashes of the logs underneath, but the actual ashes that are left from what's been consumed on top of the altar. Of the words clothe the Cohen, the Babylonian Talmud in Zevachim 23b says, that and the Sifra both point out that the Cohen wore other clothing even though only 2 pieces of clothing were mentioned here. Could you imagine? How literal are you taking something when you start thinking, oh, well, they're only supposed to show up in a t-shirt and underwear? Just because the rest of it's not mentioned does not mean that this isn't supposed to be part of the deal. Of the word linen cloth, Rashi utterly made up a new grammar rule that somehow makes these words mean that this garment had to be made to measure. And there's some stuff about the word itself on garment that you could kind of make that law out of, but he made it up. It wasn't part of the deal. He just made it up. Nachmanides made up another law that made the Kohen a sinner if this garment didn't reach his feet. What? Where did that come from? The head of Nachmanides, rather, not bees. Maybe that's what we'll start calling him. On his flesh, of those words, Rashi wrote that nothing was to come between the flesh of the Kohen and his garments. In other words, you couldn't have dirt, because if you have dirt on your arm and your garment's touching your arm, there's something between you and your flesh. Thought I'd throw that in there so you'd understand what he's saying. This is not law. It is a tradition, most likely made up by Rashi himself. This is neither a good nor a bad thing. It does not violate the Torah. And if the person in charge wants to add such a tradition, it is called binding. If that same person decides to end this type of tradition, it is called loosing. So I say that because I don't like people making things up. I don't like people making laws just for the sake of making laws because they think it makes them look deep or something. But there are times when somebody comes to you and they ask you, well, what about this and what about that? And you have to think it over, maybe pray about it, study it out, and then you come back and say, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. That's why we have binding and loosing. That's why we have an oral law. There is a need for the oral law. But I want to call it oral tradition. I don't want to call it oral law. Because it's not. That may indicate to some that that's a law given by God, and it's not. It is a tradition that was developed by somebody's rabbi. And if your rabbi does that, biblically speaking, you need to follow that. Unless it's, of course, if it's in violation of the Torah, you should have a talk with your rabbi first. If he won't listen to you, go talk to the rabbi that he answers to, and maybe he'll change his mind. If you're following somebody who just everything out of their mouth is in violation of the Torah, you're in the wrong place. God did not send you there to save that man. Get out. Anyway, of the words, the ashes. Rashbam suggested that the ashes are called deshen, which is a word for fat, because the ashes from the wood and from the fat were mixed together. I guess he's buying into the, what's that called? A grate or yeah. He's buying into the idea of a grate, and he thinks that the ashes from below the grate are going to somehow jump up on top and mix. And maybe they do. I don't know. But the law says to take them off the top of the grate. Anyway, you can see where confusion can come in on this kind of thing, because since we can't be absolutely positive that it was a solid piece of steel, which I think it was, it wouldn't have been steel in that time. What would it have been made out of? Like wrought iron material or something? Iron, maybe. But I still think it would have been like a griddle. We do know that they had griddles from that time period, so I think that's probably what it is. But if it's not, Rashbam is probably right. You know what I'm saying? That he's either right or he's wrong. We don't really have a way of knowing. Okay. Verse 4. Literally it would say, and strip off garments his, and clothe garments his, another, and make come, which we would say bring, the ashes two from outside to camp to place pure. You're going to like this one. It starts off ufashat, and strip off, properly to expand, to spread out. I still think I may have gotten the wrong thing here. Oh, well, the other way of using this word, to put off a garment, which is done with opening and unfolding. Oh, I see. So that's where they get the spread out idea. Okay, makes sense. I thought I had the wrong meaning here for a minute there. All right, so it's to take off a garment, right? You get it? My thing stopped working there. Okay, here we go. This is et. There's your arrow. Begadav. You hear begad in there? Begadav. Garment, his. So it's his garment. It's going to take off his garment. And of course, begad. That's it can be anything. It can be this talit that I'm wearing. It can be a shirt that I'm wearing. He's going to take off this outer garment, right? And then it says velavash, and clothe, and you're going to put on. So you're taking off one outer garment, and it looks like you're probably going to be putting on another, right? Because right now it's saying take the thing off, or a while ago it said take it off, and now it's saying put it back on. This is like being in the military. Pick them up, put them down. Pick them up, put them down. Some of you will get that. Anyway, next word, begadai. And so it's his garment. We've already had that word. First it was put on his garment, take off his garment, put on his garment. You get the idea someone's changing something here? This is acherim. So you take off your first one and put on another one. That's the word for another. Put on another one. Then it says vehotzi, and make and bring. So now you're going to bring what? This is et, which is your arrow pointing to something. What is it? Hadashen, the ashes. Bring the ashes. It says el, which means to. Michutz, which literally would be from outside. Bring it outside. La machane. Bring it outside the camp. El, which is to. Makom, to a place. Tahor, that's pure, to a pure place. Right? So our translation, and you should be in verse 11 if you're using the Christian Bible. And he will take off his garments and clothe himself in another garment, and bring the ashes outside the camp in a pure place. Rashi actually wrote that the Kohen changing his clothing was not required, even though the text just said it was. Nachmanides then argued, based on Rashi's argument, because he's arguing with Rashi, that the change of clothing had to take place in case it became soiled while carrying out the ashes. That may actually be true, right? I mean, that's reasonable. He's looking for a reason. Well, why has he got to change his clothes? But think about it. So this sacrifice is being made, and the sacrifice, once the sacrifice is completed, the high priest takes off his robe and puts on another one. You guys do realize they did that to Yeshua, right? So if they did that to Yeshua, it's probably not for the reason that Christians say. The Christians always told us, and even I used to teach it because that's the way I learned it, that they put it on and took it off for maximum pain, maximum effect, because they put it on, it dries in the sun, they rip it off. But what did they do? He went from the clothing that he was wearing to a king's clothing, back to the clothing that he was wearing. What does that sound like, what we just read? Just throwing that out there for the fun of it. Of the words, he will take off his garments. Rashi wrote that changing the... Oh, did I just say that? Yeah, I already said that. I have that. It was a suggestion and not an order, but what he said was, It's just proper. You should do it because it's proper. How about you do it because God told you to? Just saying. I do not have the time to do the next one. I've got just under 10 minutes, and I might be able. Let's see if we can squeak this in. Literally in English it says, and the fire upon the altar kindled in it not shall extinguish, and burn upon it the priest trees, probably logs, in mourning, and arrange upon it the burnt offering, and make smoke upon it, fat they the pieces. There's a lot in this one, but I'm going to go for it. So, ve'esh is a the ha'esh, and the fire. We've already had that word. You know, it sounds like the pouring the liquid on it and all that. The fire, all hamizba'ak, the fire that is on the altar, right? Because the altar is you realize there's more than one altar, right? You got the fire, the altar where you actually cook food. That's the barbecue pit. Then you have the altar where they burn incense, and you follow what I'm saying? There's a few more than just one. I'm just saying. Then it says to God. Do you remember that? That's the kindling of fire. It's to start a fire, to keep it burnt, to stoke a fire. That probably is the word we should use. Then it says bo. That's that sound-alike word we had where it says in it or in he. In this case, it. It sounds like the word like boa. Come here. No, it just means in it. Then it says lo. So now we have a negative article. This is don't do something. Well, what do you not do? Ti cheba. You don't extinguish it. You don't quench that fire. You don't put that fire out. Then it says u v'er, which is and burn. So that fire is to save burning, and it's to consume the whole time. Don't let that go out. Then it says aleha, upon it. Don't let that fire on that altar go out. And it says upon it or upon her. Makes more sense in Hebrew if you think about saying her, because instead of saying the altar, you say, don't let it go out on her. I don't know, maybe it sounds better in English. Her makes more sense to me. But anyway, Ha-Kohen, the priest at Zim, that's literally the word for trees in plural. So either this altar is so big that they're putting whole trees under there, or we should translate that as logs, because that's the way we think of, they're going to cut these things up to make them fit in that altar so that they'll burn. This is baboker. That's in the morning. This is baboker again. In the morning. Then it says, and there's a reason for that, right? It's going to come up in the translation. The arach, and arrange. You're going to arrange those logs. Don't you? I mean, when you do a fire, don't you arrange that stuff? That's what they're talking about. Aleha, upon it. Ha'olah, the burnt offering, you can arrange. And then when you put your meat on there, don't you do that? Arrange your meat and all that kind of stuff. You do. And that's what they're being told to do. Vehi ketzir. This could be vehi ketzir, right? But just to say it one more time, I don't believe that the way this stuff was spoken back in the time of Moshe is the same way we speak it today. Language, a primitive language, starts out essentially, I believe, from my studies, that they start off with every syllable being pronounced and being very important. And over time, people get lazy and words begin to slur together. They begin to, slur is probably the right word. And I think that's what happens. You go from vehi ketir to vehiktir, right? So that some of you will understand what that word is. And make smoke. And this is for the word of scent, of odors, of fragrance. And smoke is really the right word because you're thinking about the smoke that's going up in the air. And then it says aleha, so the smoke that's on it. Helve, it's from the fat. If you really want to get smoke going on a griddle, what do? You toss fat on there, and then you get lots of smoke. Ha shelamim. So the smoke from the fat, and the fat is for what? The peace. And this is shalom in plural. If you want to say shalom in plural, you say shalamim. Hard for us to think of that because you don't say pieces, man. We would put that to the wrong word, wouldn't we? But this means that it's going on and on and on, right? It doesn't stop, or it's going to happen in the future. It's one of the two. That's why they use plural in Hebrew. All right, so you should be in verse 12 if you're in the Christian Bible, verse 5 if you're using the right Bible. Anyway, verse 5. And the fire which is kindled on the altar, he will not extinguish, and the Cohen will burn on it morning by morning, and arrange on it the burnt offerings, and make smoke on it from the fat of the peace offering. Of the words morning by morning, even Ezra pointed out that the double use of the word baboker, in morning, was a sign of continuity. Some good examples of that you can find in Genesis 39:10, Exodus 16:5, and Psalm 68:20. See, this is why Israel and all the surrounding area is a desert, because he never put the fire out, so they wound up cutting down all the trees. It's wrong to think of it as a fire that is never put out. It's while we're making this particular sacrifice. This particular sacrifice does not stop until it's time to stop. With me? What's the 3?
3 minutes.
Oh, all right. So I have, in fact, run out of. I'm over here. I'm lost now.
Yeah, 1.
I've run out of time. It's as far as I can go this week. I hope I gave you some real good stuff, some provocative stuff, and some heavy thinking stuff. I hope you got a little of all of that out of today's message. Next week, we're going to do Ask the Rabbi, and I will allow you to ask anything that pertains to the Bible. So don't ask me personal things. Don't ask me questions about how my wife and I live and what we do and think. Ask me things pertaining to the Bible. This is your chance this week. When you think of something, write it down. And then when Sabbath comes next week, you can ask me the question. Shalom, y'all.